interesting thing that we're starting to see at the moment in the market is this idea of innovate fast, release, then fix it.
Yeah.
What's your kind of viewpoint on this?
Well, look, Ollie, I grew up in Agile. So the idea for me was, I think fast fail is really, really important. And I think it's increasingly more important now, simply because the advent of HTML5 means you can get there. And I think this whole idea of being able to sort of create iterations is increasingly more important. So, quick answer is love it to bits. I think the idea of releasing things in alpha and getting sort of people actually in the groundswell works really well. A good example of that, I guess, is Pinterest. Pinterest came out in an alpha. I sat on their alpha originally, invited guests the right way to bring that into the fray. And once you've actually get all the learnings and the nuances, and then you do a sort of mass push. And in the world today, mass push means get it to the right people and it gets in the hands of the right people. Then it's incredibly powerful. And then that gives you more ground rush to say, look, I need to change the methodologies here. But the fast fail is really, really important.
And do you think we can kind of live in perpetual beta?
Yes, and I would say, I'm saying that cautiously because I'm just thinking about brands that probably do that. I think Facebook lives in perpetual beta. They're going to get to a point, though, very soon that they're too big to be able to do that, because any iteration that they do to their tech, people are going to hate or love. I think Twitter's taught us that they're in perpetual beta, and you've seen that with things like originally sponsored tweets were backlashed. So I think, I definitely think we're in constant beta, and I think it's a good thing.
Cool. As someone, the title, Digital Prophet, sort of the global ambassador for AOL, you are exposed to and a part of and one of the influencers for. And what do you kind of see as, I suppose, the key trend, the thing that, brands should be aware of or kind of coming up on the horizon?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, and I can waft on for hours, as you know, but here's a couple of things. I think the curated nicheness is really important, and the key to that for me really comes down to, I think we're going to move away from we've moved away from information web, we've moved into the social web, we're going to move from the social web into the interest web. And people are going to want to cluster around like minds. So the idea of this interest web for me, or this interest graph, is that there are going to be areas where people are going to want to play because it's just very interesting. The challenge for agencies, I think, and for clients is to figure out where they need to be. So before it's quite easy, right? You get a comms planner that say, right, what's in the top 10? We're going to add those to the media plan, and you've sort of phoned it in. I think those days are over, because if you've got, although you might have 800,000 people over here, perhaps the best place for you to be to engage in users is over here where there's 2 million people. And it's really, really niche, but the conversation is very powerful. So, my advice to brands, or even to an agency, would be you've got to play with all the platforms, figure out how interesting they are, and are they going to be something that actually takes off. So we used to see growth paths of things like, 100% growth month over month for these sites. Those days are well over. It's like 1,000% now. Yeah. So if you look at the growth of Pinterest, or if you look at the recent numbers for Foursquare, they're massive, massive numbers. And so I think you have to be in that distributed place in those platforms as a brand, because you actually don't know what's going to take off.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point. I mean, certainly one of the things that I see is, with things like Pinterest, Instagram, whatever else, we're not able to do a traditional buy.
No.
And, if anything, it just becomes about the manpower, the man hours to be able to get something done.
Yeah.
But what's your kind of advice for a brand where, maybe they've got the agency saying to them, look, let's give this a crack.
Yeah.
But, because they've never experienced it, maybe they just kind of, why should I bother? Why should I care?
Yeah, well, there's two things. One, the brand has to get off its arse and play around with these tools. They can't always expect the agency to actually, in my view, say, because otherwise you have to sell in the logic. And if somebody's actually experimented with the product itself and understood its nuances, and I think an agency can educate them on them, but somebody has to engage in them, because otherwise how are you going to think, how do you decide what the KPI is? So that's one thing. The second thing is, there's authentic ways to bridge these platforms in beautiful ways. So you talked about Pinterest. Let me give you a good example. So The Guardian did a campaign recently where they did curation of content that they had run for Andy Warhol. And they surfaced this page in a very authentic way. It had a little bit of Guardian branding, but it's in the environment of this community of Pinterest. Another example is a German department store that did the environment of Flickr, where they created a love story in the environment of Flickr. So there are ways that we can do it beyond buttons and banners, and I think agencies can actually come up with those solutions which feel more like it's an authentic play and less like a buttons and banner buy.
So it's almost kind of going back to that original question, flipping it around and kind of saying, actually, in our campaigns, we should be innovate, try fast, break totally. It, go again.
And I think the reality of that, honestly, with beyond things like behavioural targeting and all of that good stuff, you have the ability to iterate. And when we get into dynamic iteration, which is when ads are smart enough to self-heal, I think that's going to be amazing. Yeah. But we definitely need to fast fail. And those campaigns, and I also think we can't lock on just one big campaign now. We have to have multiple campaigns that tell a similar story. And I also think the environment of that campaign needs to be authentic. So one of the things that AOL does, obviously, with Devil is tries to make sure we match great content with great ads. And so the environment is more authentic and it makes sense. Now, if you think about the Pinterest example, or you think about something like YouTube, you can actually embed content in those things that go beyond any sort of media plan you typically do today. And it goes into that innovation and experiment play and feels like, because it's in the environment that makes sense, people will actually find it to be more, just more natural and less like the uninvited guest to the party. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Definitely. And it's very much what we're looking to do, and I think it's about how you bring that sort of human experience into it, and say, what, a human experience doesn't have to be a mass event. It can just be that tiny community, but let's talk to that community properly.
I agree.
Cool. One of the things that you sort of talk about quite passionately is this idea of our digital lives becoming too cluttered. Yeah. Do you want to just sort of explain what you mean by that?
So there's a number of things there. Our lives are pretty hectic anyway, and when you think about your digital life, so you've got email, you've got mass communication coming to you with a number of sites that you sort of tend to visit and hang out with, so there's a lot to absorb anyway. And then the social graph has become really cluttered. And I think, quite honestly, if we were to put our hands up, are we suffering from social fatigue? I think you'd see a lot of hands go up. And the reality of that is, a lot of what the social network space is doing, the graph, is taking any iteration of you're doing, whether it's on the mobile, the 3-inch, or whether you're on a tablet, or anything you're expressing elsewhere, they're trying to get that onto the environment of their space. So whether it's Facebook's wall or whether it's Twitter, they're trying, and even publishers are trying to get their content pushed into the social sphere. And the challenge with that is it clutters up. So again, we're following too many people, we have too many friends, and we have too many followers to actually absorb all of that noise. So I think what's happening is we're becoming completely overwhelmed with all of this information coming from the social graph. And again, it comes back to that concept of niche. So I think what's going to happen is that we'll end up cleansing our social graph and saying, you know what, I just value those 100 people. They're the 100 people that I can listen to and trust. And even if I feel like I'm missing something, they're actually connected enough for me to make sure I'm discovering. So I really think that's a trend that we're at the moment. So I think the web's taught us to be ADD. And we're getting back to saying, well, how do I make this better for me? I'm also big on humanising the web. So, an example of that is 4 or 5 years ago, I'd be a hectic worker. And I'd, spend 16 hours in front of a monitor. And then I'd go to dinner and I'd be the guy falling asleep at the dinner table on Friday nights. We've all been there, right? So I'm making a conscious effort right now to make sure that if I'm going to spend 16 hours in front of a PC or surfing on the web, it bloody well better make me a better human and a better dinner companion. So I'm making sure that's definitely the case now. So humanising the web for me is really important.
Yeah. No, I found myself exactly the same. Doing the,
hopefully not falling asleep at dinner.
Doing the Facebook cull. It's just like, whatever. If I look at a photo, I don't know who you are within 5 seconds, you're gone.
Oh, completely.
Just clean it up.
And also, even in places like LinkedIn or Facebook, I've probably got about 100 unaccepted invites. And not because, I don't care for those people, I just don't have enough investment in them. I also ask myself this question of, would they ever pick me up from the airport? If the answer is no, then I don't actually know whether I want them in my... And I think the curiosity then goes. So the whole Friendster model years ago, if you think about that, is, I'm curious to see what my old mates are up to. But if I'm that invested in their lives, then I would actually still be in touch with them. They're the ones that I speak to on the phone. They're the ones that I Skype with. They're the ones that I actually do want to engage with. But everyone else is kind of like a curiosity factor. And now when you put a brand into that mix, then it becomes quite interrupted for me as a consumer, which is there's a lot of information that I'm really interested in, and then suddenly there's something that I might have liked from a brand, but is it still something that I liked before? And is the message they're telling me now something that I would like again? I'd have to question that.
And talking quite heavily about social media there,
yeah.
What is, it's been, get me the likes, get me the fans.
Sure.
Now we're starting to move into, actually, what does that really mean?
Sure.
What's your kind of take on that? Have we become too obsessed by the like?
Yeah, I think the quick answer to that is clearly yes, and for two reasons. One, Ollie, there used to be an investment in our relationship, which was a friend request. So remember those days when you have to friend somebody and you'd have to friend me back before we can converse? But now you can like my shoes, my pants, my glasses, my coat. You can like 10 things about me or as a brand or an entity before you actually like that person. There's no skin in the game. So clearly there's a dilution there. And if the value of a like is just a simple click to say, oh no, I like that. Well, like in the human sense has been diluted, because you've actually diluted it down to being a course of action as opposed to a commitment. So yeah, it's completely been diluted, and not just likes. I mean, following is becoming diluted because it's a popularity contest, and I don't think that's the way it should be approached. It should be of who can I influence that's going to influence me, or who can I like who's going to influence me to want to talk about it impassionedly. And that's the value of what this social graph is talking about with a friend of a friend. Until that happens, what we've got is passive relationships, and I think that it'll just come and go. So yeah, it'll totally be diluted.
And as a final question, we start to see how social, it's now about going back to that core, I suppose, the family, as opposed to the strangers on the street that actually I don't give a shit who you are kind of thing.
Yeah.
How important is it then that we start to look at content as the ad as opposed to the ad being the ad?
Yeah, 1,000%. And the immediate reaction to that is I think let me backtrack. I think brands have more content distributed outside their owned and operated than they do in their own and operated, for many reasons. One, it could be managed by the tech team, the marketing team doesn't own that brand identity, multiple issues. However, given that's the case, they're already in the game of building content, whether it's video, whether it's text, whether it's commenting, whether it's, there's a number of things that happen in the environment of the context of content. So yeah, I think it's vitally more important that it either sits as a companion or is complementary to whatever they're doing as a campaign. And I think media campaigns are still important, but content is equally as important. Now the challenge is this: I don't think brands get content. They just don't do it very well. Publishers get content really well, they don't do ads very well. So that whole thing coming together is actually a nice partnership. But there is massive value in brands being content creators. They just need to know how to do it, and I think they're very poor at it today. Yeah.
Cool.